morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good. Good morning, sun. Good, good, good morning. Good morning. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good. Good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun.
Hello and happy Monday. It is a holiday here in the US today. However, I had a class at 7 a.m. Pacific time this morning with AJ Kaufman. It was a class on OAuth for Business Central. And following that class, I had questions, I had thoughts. And so immediately following the class, I started pulling some stuff together and slap this together to discuss. Because I have questions, and maybe it's just me, but I have a few years of kind of experience and intuition in this area. So, yeah, I have concerns, but let's find out what you think. And happy to be wrong here, but let me know. So, if you are in the Business Central community, the Business Central world, and pretty much any role, implementer, even customer, certainly on the technical side, definitely on anything related to integrations, you should be aware of something called OAuth, or specifically OAuth v2.0. And this is a standard for authorization. I was on a session last Saturday or Saturday before with Saurav Diani, and he emphasized a great point, which I hadn't really thought of, that OAuth is not for authentication. OAuth is for authorization. And that may sound like a subtle distinction, but it is a critical, significant, fundamental distinction. So OAuth v2.0 authorization framework was implemented or adopted by Business Central as the new authorization framework for accessing Business Central web APIs. And so lots of background on that, makes total sense. I get it. It's replacing the authorization access key, I believe it's called, or the web API key that used to be set up on a per user record in Business Central. It was just a string, a long random string. So OAuth is replacing that for very good reasons. More secure, better management, integrated with Azure, a little more granular control, different security options, and it is using the OAuth v2.0 standard. So, yep, all makes sense. You could have a laundry list of reasons why this makes sense, why it's a better option than a web access key. I don't argue with that, technically, okay? But everything exists in context, right? You could have the best security, the best solution in the world, but if customers can't enter and exit your business, what good is that security? Or if you have security that is really, really good and you have a solution that's technically excellent, but it's too complex for anyone to use, what good is it? And so I'm interested in the practical implementation, the practical concerns around OAuth v2.0. And for context, I'm in the US. I deal primarily with US customers. I do have a few customers outside the US, Canada, Mexico, Central and South America. So basically in the Americas is the region I've been serving for the last 15 years, I believe, primarily in the Dynamics GP world, and now moving over to the Business Central world. So I work with United States, primarily United States SMB customers, small, medium-sized businesses, right? Like I think in the GP world, average user count was less than 10. And, maybe it was 20 million, 50 million, 100 million. I have some larger customers now, given what I do in that space in the GP world. But, these are small businesses. These are not enterprise businesses with hundreds of employees and dozens of internal IT staff managing their technical organization. Similarly, context of US ERP partners in the Dynamics space, these are typically not 100-person organizations. They typically don't have, teams of dedicated experts in dozens of different areas. You're wearing a dozen hats as a practitioner in a US ERP partner role. I mean, you pretty much have to. You have sales, marketing, licensing, administration, implementation, training, financial side, reporting. There are a lot of things you have to do, and very few partners in the US that I've seen have teams with dedicated specialized skill sets. So that's the context. And then there's technical debt. Everyone has technical debt. Even if you think you don't have technical debt today, I guarantee you tomorrow you will very quickly have technical debt because something will change, right? Microsoft is changing, languages are changing, implementations are changing, versions are changing, upgrades are occurring. You have compliance laws, you have new features. Something is changing that is going to cause technical debt. And in this case, going from a web service access key to OAuth v2.0, boom, technical debt. Well, OAuth v2.0 also involves Azure Active Directory. So even if you say, I understand OAuth v2.0 and how it works with Business Central, well, there are all sorts of implications with Azure Active Directory, both the customer's Active Directory environment and, say, your partner environment or your ISV environment. They all start to interact at some point in a more complex scenario. Okay, so I'm not an Azure Active Directory expert. I have met people who claim to be. I'm going to guess that there are very few US ERP partners, Dynamics partners, that have Azure Active Directory experts. I mean, maybe they took the Azure course, Azure certification, but I'm going to guess that is a very, very small minority of personnel. Happy to be wrong there, but based on the partners I deal with, based on the customers I deal with, I have not met many Azure Active Directory experts in my day-to-day conversations with people, let alone on-prem Active Directory. The disasters I've seen on-prem gives me some indication of what we're going to be dealing with Azure Active Directory expertise. Well, when you're dealing with Azure Active Directory, you're also implicitly dealing with security. So fundamentally, it's a security architecture. It's authorization, it's authentication, and you can have the keys to the kingdom that can cause some serious concerns in terms of security. And so there are a lot of implications for needing security expertise when you're discussing this fundamentally. And then all of this has to be taken in the context of risk, right? Like, is the mom and pop shop that has 3 users on Business Central, are they going to be targeted by a nation state for their Business Central data? Highly unlikely. I get that. However, there are very, very real risks that can take down a multi-million-dollar company due to a simple mistake. One email attachment can take down an entire organization. Last week I had a conversation, multi-million-dollar company completely shut down for weeks because they got ransomware. Happens all the time, nonstop. So there are very real risks, but you have to, what's the relative risk here? So this is all just context for this conversation. So let's just start with technical debt. So whoever is completely without technical debt, feel free to criticize. If you have zero technical debt, I will accept your claim that OAuth v2.0 implementation is simple, is easy, it's a non-issue, and what's the problem? Fine. I don't know too many people like that. So to reduce my technical debt, I've been trying to learn and reading about and studying and taking other courses on OData and BC APIs for a couple years now. And it's not continuous, but I've tried several times. I've taken a couple classes, I've tried to implement it, and there were just things that, like, what? I don't get it. This doesn't make sense. And I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I'm pretty sure I'm just above, somewhere above the 50th percentile. So I'll give myself that much credit. And if I'm not understanding this, and if I think this is complex and confusing, and it's just not clear, all of these moving pieces, well, then there's a lot of people behind me that are going to have this same concern. So when AJ scheduled yet another class trying to explain OAuth, and I think this is at least the second, probably the third class I've taken with him regarding web APIs. And incidentally, he did touch on OAuth, but this is a dedicated class, OAuth with Business Central. It is 4 days, 8 hours total, 2 hours a day, 7 a.m. Pacific time for me today and the next 3 days, which I've got to take kids to school, so I'm going to have to juggle. So I had to know about the class. I had to pay for the class, and I have to attend the class for 4 days, 2 hours a day, and then I'm going to have to study to learn, to let this stuff start to sink in. Otherwise, I'll forget it in 48 hours. So that is what I'm doing to reduce my technical debt. And you know why I am very confident that we have a serious technical debt problem is because there were less than 100 people in this class. If there are less than 100 people in AJ's class this week, I know there are at least 100 other people who have technical debt regarding OAuth, because this class should be packed. Anyone who is in the Business Central arena, partners, consultants, who has to deal with BC, web APIs, integrations, you should be in this class. Like, you may think you know OAuth. I'm going to try to demonstrate you don't understand OAuth. You may think you know how to mechanically go through and switch certain options. I'm going to speculate that you don't fully understand those options that you're configuring and what the implications of those options are. Could be wrong. You may be much smarter than me. I fully accept that. But I just listened to AJ for 2 hours and my brain is melting. So I have to assume that not everyone fully understands this content. So let me try and demonstrate. This is just a few slides that AJ shared over the course of a few minutes of a 2-hour session, which is just day 1 of 4 regarding OAuth. And I understand the context of OAuth, but when you get into the details and the mechanics, it's kind of involved. And you could say, well, you don't really need to understand the mechanics as long as you understand the relevant portions. Well, if you may understand an option, but if something is set incorrectly, what are the implications of that? Without knowing this stuff, I don't think you can fully understand it, because I didn't. And I'm asking a few questions and he's explaining what that means. And I'm like, whoa, okay, I'm starting to see the bigger implications. And I've been studying this for months, if not a couple of years, right? And now it's just starting to click what some of the implications of some of these options are and how that can cascade into other problems down the line. So my conclusion is this is complex. OAuth v2.0 is fundamentally technically complex. And then you get into the specific Microsoft implementation using Azure Active Directory and published applications. That specific implementation in Azure is also complex. So you've got two layers of complexity. On top of that rides Business Central, which is depending upon this stack of complexity for authentication and authorization in order to provide web API access to the application and application data. It's complex. And if someone says it's not complex, it's super simple, good for you. But I will speak for the rest of the world who are not rocket scientists. This is complex. And if there are less than hundreds of people in AJ's classes, I take that as a sign that there is a serious technical debt problem that is mounting. So, OAuth isn't hard. You've got it handled, huh? Okay, great. Pop quiz. How many production Business Central SaaS environments are still using web service key authentication? Because if OAuth is not complex, and if it's easy to configure and set up, and like this is a no-brainer, right? Like you just flip a switch. How hard can it be? Take a guess. Now, I don't know how, I forget how many Business Central tenants there are. Tens of thousands, right? Over 20,000, I think I saw in the last published figure. So over 20,000 customers using Business Central. Of that, only a subset are going to need web service, integrations, and only, but those should be using OAuth. So let's just say some fraction of that. So according to Kenny, this is as of March, almost 3,000 production tenants were still using the web service access key even after he has been screaming for months from the top of the mountain to stop using this and to migrate to OAuth. And he's trying to figure out, how do we turn this off when I have 3,000 production tenants? He sent out emails, tweets, newsletters, announcements, Business Central admin notifications, tenant notifications. He's done everything. 3,000 are still using it. And so a recent Twitter thread, this was being discussed. How do you turn this off? And I think it was AJ who pulled up the Exchange Online, what they did, and they just started randomly picking tenants. They're like, tough. We've done all we can to warn you. We're going to start randomly turning this off. You cannot turn it back on. Tough to hooties, whatever the phrase is. You're going to deal with it. So this tells me we have quite a few people who have no idea this is happening. Or maybe they do, but they don't know how to get off, or they don't have the skill, the knowledge, the resources. Who knows what the reason is? They didn't get the memo. I don't know. But we're about to watch what happens. Eventually, maybe, hopefully, at some point, this is going to get turned off. And, hey, and anyone who's familiar with TLS 1.2, this has been going on for years, right? And at some point, the credit card gateways, the bank providers, the email providers, Microsoft just did this with Office 365. TLS 1.2 turned off. Bye-bye. Nope, no more excuses. No more extensions. It is gone. And stuff breaks, and guess what? People deal with it. They eventually figure out, oh, this doesn't work. They scramble. They find someone who understands what's going on, and they get it fixed. So I say just turn it off. But I'm going to make a case that it's moderately complex. And Eric says that many of these customers have just purchased some app or service that use basic auth. The customer has no clue they're actually using it. Totally agree. And perhaps they had a partner implementing it. And to this day, I talk to partners, Business Central partners, who still try to implement the web service access key, they have absolutely no understanding that that is deprecated or even going away, and they don't know how to spell OAuth. And, you know, what can you do? And this is the case that I'm making for the practical consequences of OAuth. And like, I don't blame them. Technical debt is brutal, right? And yes, it's their job, but there's the reality of just capacity and constraints in human learning, right? Okay, so just another example. How many BC customers do you think have Business Central Admin Center notifications enabled and configured properly? Wild guess, pessimistically, I would say less than 50%. Could be wrong. Maybe it's 60, 70, 80. I know it's not 100%. So I'm going to guess less than 70, less than 60, somewhere around there, have Business Central Admin Center notifications enabled and configured to a valid email address and are actually getting notifications about pending upgrades, actual upgrades, upgrade failures, you name it, right? I just saw this yesterday and it made my jaw drop because I know that I'm going to say lots of customers do not have Business Central admin notifications enabled and configured properly. And here Microsoft is removing the notification recipient list from Business Central Admin Center. You have got to be kidding me. So already low adoption is going to be even lower adoption because, as I read in Yun Chu's blog post, this is being moved apparently to the Office 365 Admin Center Notification Center, which, like, the one thing I like about Business Central Admin Center, it's super simple, it's super clean, it's dedicated. Office 365, like, I just don't deal with it as much. And so when I go in there, I'm like, where is this? And so this is getting pushed over to there. And I had to go find where are those notifications appearing, because I think Kenny sent a note about it a while back to check there. Like, I had to go look for it. You think the average customer knows what this is? One, do they even know what their business admin center looks like? Two, do they know what their Office 365 admin center looks like? I can confidently say no because I deal with customers who do not know how to configure Office 365 mail daily. And they don't know the first thing about where to configure the security options and configuration options in Office 365 or Azure. So I'm going to guess this is, let's just like generously say we have a 60 to 70% adoption rate for Business Central Admin Center notifications. Happily bet it's going to drop below 50% adoption once this moves over to Office 365. I don't know what else to say. It's just one more thing for someone to keep track of. And you can say, well, it's one less thing for them to keep track of. Fair, that may be the case. But it also means they now need to understand that this goes in Office 365 and not the BC Admin Center. And not just customers, but partners, consultants, administrators. So there you go. I think it probably makes sense from an administrative perspective, consolidation perspective. I get the rationale, but it is a change where you already had low adoption. Okay. Similarly, what do you think the adoption of Application Insights is? I think every single Business Central customer should have an instrumentation key for Business Central Application Insights or Azure Application Insights in their BC environment. Period. I regularly talk to customers and consultants, and I ask them about telemetry, and they say, what? No idea what it is. Like, not everyone is on Twitter. Not everyone is scouring YouTube for Business Central content. I know, as hard as that is to believe, people apparently have lives, unlike me, and they have no idea what Application Insights is. They have no idea that they can configure an instrumentation key in their BC Admin Center. Like, they don't know the first thing about it. So, yeah. So another thing about OAuth, which just clicked to me today during the class this morning with AJ. User impersonation. When you use user impersonation flow with OAuth in Business Central, this pops up. And you would think, well, yeah, the user is being prompted to say, hey, just to let you know, this application is going to get access to your Business Central via the APIs, so do you accept? What really is this? This is a Business Central user being asked to grant full access to the Business Central API for a third-party application or service or who knows. Think about that. Now, in my experience on-prem, I tell customers, do not expose anything about your ERP system on the internet. No open ports, no direct access. If you want to go web services, I personally use, for the on-prem, I personally use some type of indirect method using, limited store procedures or whatever. And so this is asking a user, could be a regular BC user, to grant access to the APIs. Would I allow that in an on-prem world? Nope, absolutely not. So this was discussed during class, and AJ said that he didn't happen to know offhand, but he said he thought there was a way to require an admin level user in order to grant this access. So I'm going to follow up and see what that is. But user impersonation, my recommendation, conservative, security focused. I don't want Sally in accounting or Bob in sales being able to click accept here and grant some application access to the Business Central APIs. Like, that seems crazy to me. So, yeah, I mean, maybe there's some rationalization for this. I don't get it. I open to suggestions, but this to me is a hard no. Okay, so on a related note, how many Business Central customers have MFA number matching enabled? How many people have heard of MFA number matching? How many people know what that is? It is a specific feature of the Microsoft two-factor authentication app, and it requires the entry of a number during two-factor authentication. And this was implemented, this was enabled or developed. I think it's been around for a while, but my understanding is this is now a recommended best practice standard configuration because of, I forget what the term is, but it's an MFA annoyance attack. And so the attackers will constantly ping a user with MFA requests. And all it takes is one accidental hit or one I give up, and they just say approve. And without this code, that gives the attacker access. So this requires entry of the correct code. And that is to get to negate or mitigate the pester attacks for MFA. And so regarding the user granting access, Eric says, consent on behalf of your organization can only be done by admin, and you can set up your AAD to not allow users to use an app unless it's approved. So yes, and so I think consent on behalf of organization is showing up because I'm the admin. That's my guess. I didn't take the time to look at a standard user, but I would not want this to show up for any standard user of Business Central personally. Unless I learn more and understand how this can be acceptable, I think this is a little too permissive. So if you're not using MFA number matching, just Google it. Here's the link, how to MFA number match or how to enable MFA number match in Azure. It is buried several menus deep. There's no way I can find it without Googling the instructions. It is just way too deep in the menus, and you got to right click on 3 dots, and then you got to go into configure, and then you got to turn it on. And it listed as experimental still. So you really should enable this. Many multi-factor attacks are occurring because the attackers are able to get some user to accept the MFA prompt on their device. And so you're just seeing the pile of knowledge required to do this properly, okay? Then app registrations, you could say, Steve, app registrations aren't that hard. I've actually had people tell me that. I'm like, for you, maybe. For me, once I get into this app registration, my eyes glaze over because there are 75 different options. And maybe only 6 are relevant for Business Central. I don't yet know which 6 those are, and I don't yet know how to ignore the rest that are noise. And I'm not yet comfortable about the different scenarios and how to choose the right option, but fine. It's not rocket science, and with some guidance, it's not hard to follow instructions. But there are 2 components here. There's proper configuration on the initial implementation, and then there's long-term management. If you open up an Azure Active Directory or an Active Directory and you look at a list of accounts, permissions, access, app registrations, go out 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 3 years. Look at the list and tell me what all that stuff does. So not only is it proper initial configuration, but you've got long-term management. And I see some of these can expire, but are these being managed? If you no longer need that access, is it being revoked? Who goes in here and monitors this? Who is assessing this? Who is, doing audits of this? It's just one more thing to add to the stack. And are these configured properly? It's not obvious, and you have to know what you're looking for. And I just don't have that skill yet. I'm hoping to gain that skill. Maybe we'll do a conference session on it, write a blog post. I just don't have it yet. Another question that came up during the class, I'm just listening to AJ talk about this, and I'm like, I want to know what's going on here, right? I don't want to have to dig in here proactively and try and figure out what's configured, what's misconfigured, what's no longer necessary. Well, I want logging and auditing. How do I view app registration usage and activity? How do I know what still needs to be there? What's being used? What's using it? Can I configure telemetry? I don't know the answer, but I'm going to guess no, because this is hitting Azure AD before it's even getting to, Business Central and AL. And I don't know if Business Central is even getting potential signals to log, say, failed authentication request, maybe failed hits against the app registration. I just don't know. How do you know if there's abuse against an app registration? Maybe there are 1,000 authentication attempts against it or authorization attempts. I don't know. I suspect that's more on the Azure side of things. And I'm just not an Azure security expert, right? And so how do I know when I should shut something down, when I should reconfigure, when I should change it, lock it down? What are the exploit attempts? I just don't know. That is an entire career, literal career, just knowing about Azure Active Directory security management. So it's pretty crazy. So I'm sure there are people who will say, Steve, chill, bro. It's not that big a deal, man. It's just your opinion, man. Right? When I have conversations and people say it's not that complex, I really second guess myself. It's like the variant, it's like a corollary of imposter syndrome. Wait, do I not know what I'm talking about? Does this person really know everything they're talking about? And are they that good? They seem really calm and confident, and I just have to check myself. Maybe, but I have a little bit of experience and assessing this, and I work with hundreds of customers, literally hundreds. I have multiple support calls every day with customers for the on-prem solution that I work with, and this is my barometer. This is just one barometer, right? Do they use a password manager? And this is both customers and partners. These are the password managers I see every single day. We have the old standard called Notepad. So we have passwords.txt on the desktop, and this is what I see. We have the second level password manager called OneNote. So they share a OneNote file in the organization with customer passwords. Then we have the advanced, the ultra secure crowd that uses SharePoint or Microsoft CRM, whatever it is, the cloud-based SaaS password manager. And this is what I see day in, day out. We have VPN credentials, SA credentials, Windows domain credentials, application credentials, all stored this way. It is a minority, a growing minority, but it is a clear minority of customers and consultants who use actual secure password managers. It is not hard to do, but the adoption is staggeringly low. And if this is an indicator, I'm just going to venture to guess that properly implementing OAuth v2 for Business Central, where you're really giving some keys to the kingdom to some applications and users, we have a practical issue coming up here. And if anyone has any doubt about the validity of my concerns, I recently had a 15-minute call with my good friend Shannon Mullins, a Business Central MVP. I asked her for a favor. Her company, Accelerant, not a plug, just this is a real world conversation. I asked her for a favor. I said, can I speak to one of your security engineers? Her firm, in addition to implementing Business Central, happens to have a deep Microsoft security practice, including a security operations center. They're a full managed security solution provider, MSSP. And I forget his name, but he gets on the phone and we start talking. And my bet is give the Accelerant security expert 15 minutes and they will absolutely destroy any misconceptions you may have about your ability to secure your Azure Active Directory, your applications, and your business. I don't care how safe you think you are, how many safeguards you think you have. 5 questions in the conversations, and he will absolutely crush any hopes you had that you are doing things completely, properly, comprehensively. He may give you a good pat on the back, nice try, but he'll point out all the things you're missing and he'll just say there's no way you could possibly manage this. And he's right. So he pointed me to this article. All these organizations internationally are warning that hackers are increasingly targeting MSPs. And the reason this came up and the reason I requested the call is because I regularly get phishing emails from Dynamics partners in the US who I have worked with. They sent me an email asking for a price list. They sent me an email for support. I emailed them to send them license keys, invoices, whatever the case is. I get the email from some address from their organization and it says, thank you for, your assistance. Attached is your receipt, whatever. It's like a PDF, it's a link, something. And it's clearly a phishing email trying to get my Office 365 credentials. I instantly know that they have been compromised. This user has had their Office 365 email compromised. So I asked Shannon, I want to have a call with your security expert to understand the implications of all of these Dynamics partners that I work with that have clearly been compromised. And I'm notifying them that their account has been hacked because a user clicked on the wrong link. And he says, yep, once that attacker gets access to their account, goodbye. Their SharePoint site that was storing their customer passwords, that OneNote file that was storing their customer passwords, game over, right? Anything in Teams, potentially game over. You can traverse all these Microsoft resources once you compromise that account. And it's brutal. It's brutal. And Like 15-minute conversation will just crush your hopes that you have any chance defending yourself against this. And I don't know what the answer is other than paying money for professionals. And that's his conclusion. He's like, look, there's no way you can do this. You're not an expert. You don't have the experts on staff. These small businesses don't have experts. Even the partners don't have the experts. You need to be an expert in Azure, Active Directory, security. You need to have monitoring. Do you have endpoint protection? Like one email. And yesterday, May 29th, I saw tweets, maybe it was the 28th. There's a new 0-day exploit, Microsoft Word. Simply you open the document. And my understanding is simply opening the Word document will trigger the action to exploit this 0-day vulnerability in what's called a protocol handler in Windows. Like, even security experts are staring at this like, you have got to be kidding me. It's some obscure protocol handler that was apparently for some type of testing no one's ever heard of, and someone very, very clever figured out how to exploit this protocol handler through a second level exploit using Microsoft Word. So this is an active 0-day that needs to be mitigated by Microsoft. So with all that context, just saying, I think we have some challenges with OAuth v2.0. So, okay, fine. But what are the practical risks and realities? It's very easy to go doom and gloom and to say this end the world, but it's not. So OAuth v2 is probably not the top security risk for an organization, right? Much more likely that a phishing email comes in, you have some type of end user compromise that gets their credentials that way, right? That's much easier than trying to reverse engineer and hack the OAuth v2.0 app registration and, come in via the front door. Why do that? Oops. Why do that when you can come right in the back door? There's a screen door in back. You just walk right in because a user clicked on the wrong thing. So I'm assuming OAuth v2 is not a huge, it's not one of the top 10 vectors for getting access to customer information. There are much easier ways to get keys to the entire kingdom. The OAuth v2 just gets you access to Business Central. I'm going to guess that customers, those 2,900 plus customers that are still using Web Access Key, that's going to go on as long as it is allowed. The only time people are going to be forced to use OAuth v2 is when they have no other alternative and it has to be used. So I say go for it sooner rather than later. Pull the Band-Aid off. We're all going to have to deal with it. Sooner we're forced to deal with it, the sooner we'll have to learn it. We're going to have to deal with improper configuration. Someone's going to fumble around in app registration, figure out something that worked, no idea what they were doing. That's me. And they'll paste in some URLs and tokens and user prompts and, allow access at the user level. It's going to work. They're going to, get by. And you're going to have some improper configurations out there. So be prepared for that. No surprise. Just like everything else we deal with. There will be excessive access, excessive permissions, things that you don't really need in that configuration. But I'm going to say that malicious apps are probably going to be very rare, non-existent for now. Maybe someone will exploit it, but in my experience, it's not typical that you have published apps trying to, impersonate legitimate apps. So I'm going to guess that's going to be a fraction of the concern there. So relatively low risk. And most customers are going to need help. No way customers are going to be able to figure this out on their own. So they're going to need help. They're going to reach out to their partner or some consultant. They may not understand. They'll fumble through it. And you go back up to improper configuration and the circle of life goes on. So if you've been around in the ERP world, the IT world, the development world, you've seen this over and over again. Bad code, improper permissions, improper implementation, no backups. It's the typical story. But OAuth is moderately complex. So, I guess we'll see what's going on. And I speculate, we're going to have some hierarchy of how this gets rolled out, adopted, the information gets disseminated. You have the experts. So AJ Kaufman is teaching classes on this stuff. He's very prominent when it comes to BC Web APIs. So he's one to reach out to if you need help on this. And as he trains people, more and more people will understand this a little better. I'm going to guess ISV solutions and third-party apps or maybe developers are going to figure this out and say, okay, well, this works. Follow these directions step by step, and it should work for you. And hopefully, if that's done properly, there's minimal risk and it just works and it's not a huge concern. It's just going to take time. We're going to get more blog posts and videos with simplified instructions. I've tried to follow several, and either the instructions don't work, the blog post is old, or the OAuth flow that is being used is not relevant to Business Central because it's more of a generic Azure Active Directory app registration documentation or tutorial. I've had that many times. So, but I don't think we're there yet. The blog posts and simplified instructions I found, they just say, do this. Like it's kind of a hand wave and a magic wand and things suddenly work. It's not clear to me that there's understanding as to why they specified certain options. Partners will eventually figure out whatever prescribed configuration that just works and, minimum level of knowledge required to make that happen. And customers are just going to cope with it with whatever help they can get. So that's my guess. A little pessimistic, but 15 years of experience just watching this unfold in other dimensions. So it's tough. It's just the technical debt is huge. It's really hard to overcome. So I don't expect we're going to have, hundreds of OAuth v2 experts, but just like many things in life, I don't understand all the electronics and mechanics in my car, but I can drive my car. So fortunately, we're at the point where it's been dumbed down enough where I can get into my car and safely drive to the grocery store and come back home without harming myself or others, due to the car, right? So OAuth, I assume the knowledge is going to eventually trickle down to a point where we've kind of got this figured out. And maybe, Business Central will have a one-click implementation that'll configure it in your Azure Active Directory. That's actually not a bad idea. So anyway, just some thoughts. So these are my concerns about the practical aspects of OAuth v2.0 for Business Central. And I've only done day one. Still have 6 more hours to go. I'm sure I'll learn lots, and then I need to practice. And I'm just looking for this to gel. Like, I get the concept. I kind of understand some of the mechanics, but I just am not comfortable with which options mean what's the best option for this scenario, things like that. So, so Eric, yes, OAuth videos, like explain like I'm 5 level, I think would be good. And I think one of the biggest things is I've seen repeatedly, like the biggest thing I see in OAuth tutorials, blog posts, whatever is, oh, you just paste this in here. And there's no discussion of like where that value came from, why, what your options are. And that's the problem. And the challenge that AJ has in teaching the class is once you get a question about why that value is, it takes you into the design of OAuth, the implementation of Azure Active Directory app registrations, and it starts to get complex and confusing. So I don't know quite how to guide people on the proper selection of a given field value without talking about some of the background. So I don't know where that balance is, but yes, anyone who writes a blog post on this, anyone who makes a video about this, I don't care if 100 other people have done it, please just do it. Write your blog post, make your video, show your tutorial, and just be careful. Don't assume you're right. Just like be open to suggestions, like maybe there's a different way to do this for a different configuration because people have different implementation options they may need. But yes, open to any and all input. I think this is going to be a challenge in the coming months as everyone needs to start implementing this to start working with the Business Central web APIs, and maybe you're using the older web services. And with that, have a good one. and go reduce some technical debt. Cheers.
Good, good, good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above.